In today's society, neurodivergence is gaining increasing recognition and relevance. What is neurodivergence, and is there hope for children and families facing this situation?
We'll discuss this and more today on Real Family Talk. Join us.
Welcome to Real Family Talk. During this episode, we are discussing raising and supporting neurodivergent children.
In today's society, neurodivergence is gaining increasing recognition and relevance. Neurodiversity encompasses a range of conditions such as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism, dyslexia, and more, as outlined by the American Psychiatric Association. Families of neurodivergent children face unique daily challenges, and it is important to create environments that are welcoming, foster acceptance, and promote understanding. Mindy Salyers is joining us today to help us understand this issue further.
Mindy has been an elementary school educator and school counselor for more than 20 years in private and public school systems with a focus on social-emotional learning. Mindy provides individual, small group, and whole school guidance for preschool through high school age students. Since 2013, Mindy has served as a bullying prevention trainer for La Sierra University Center for Conflict Resolution. She has trained nearly 150 schools and community youth organizations across North America. And of course, she lives with her husband and two daughters. Mindy, thank you so much for being here with us today. We're glad to have you back with us.
Thank you, Willie and Elaine. I'm always glad to be here with you.
Awesome. So Mindy, you've worked with children for a long time. Neurodivergence is not a new thing, though it has recently been given a name and is now being given more attention. So tell us, what exactly is neurodivergence and how prevalent is it?
Yeah, Elaine, you're so right. This is kind of a new term, although it's been present since the beginning of time. So in 1998, Judy Singer, who is an Australian sociologist, really coined the term neurodiversity. And it's a term used to describe the difference in some people's brains and how they function differently, how they have different strengths and different weaknesses, as opposed to a neurotypical brain, which functions as we would think is sort of a standard operating brain.
Right. So tell us a little more about what the neurodivergent brain is compared to the neurotypical brain.
Yeah, absolutely. So for some reason, brains are developing differently, and that can be for a whole host of reasons. And again, neurodiversity is a non-medical term, but often these brains are developed differently because of a medical diagnosis, a mental health diagnosis. It could be a learning disability. So there's a host of reasons why a brain would be neurodivergent.
Okay, so what are some common misconceptions or stereotypes about neurodivergent children, and what's the truth?
Oh, I love this question. I think often parents are scared to get any kind of label. They're afraid that their child will be labeled and then therefore be more susceptible for bullying, for inequitability, all of those things. But I find so much strength in a label because it helps the family and it tells the world, hey, here is how this child is unique. And we know, right, biblically, each child is made in the image of God, and they are fearfully and wonderfully made. I have on my daughter's wall, and she has a disability. I'm looking at it right now. It's a print that says, "You are fearfully and wonderfully made." And each child is made in the image of God, whether they have a neurotypical brain or a neurodivergent brain. And so I find a label of neurodivergency to be very helpful for families so that they can educate their child, themselves, and a church community and a school community how to best serve their child.
So basically what I'm hearing you say, Mindy, is that if you can name it, perhaps you can deal with it, respect it, and treat it in a special way, rather than if you have no name for it and you're basically just dismissing the person.
Wow. Oh, I love that you said that. Yes. If you don't name it, then you are in a way doing a disservice to that child. Often we find, especially in the education field, that a name helps us better understand the child, learn what the child can do best, and then learn how to accommodate the child too.
Yeah, I think that's the operative word, is accommodate the child,
Yes.
so that we're not trying to get this neurodivergent child to fit into the norm
Yeah.
of some other child, and it doesn't make them bad,
Or less
or
than.
less than.
Yes.
It just
Yes.
means that they need different accommodations. It's kind of like accommodating left-handed people,
Yes.
at a dinner
Absolutely.
table.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's so critical that we understand this, especially, when we're talking about children with ADHD, let's say. How does that label help families? Because so many families are afraid for their child to get this label, and understandably sometimes it's over diagnosed, but some people don't even want to deal with it.
You're touching on a couple things, that parental fear of, I don't want my child labeled, when in fact a name or a term can really help serve a child and help the adults around the child to better serve. You asked specifically about ADHD. I just finished working with a Christian non-denominational school, and they have a philosophy around ADHD. Oh, it's just, overly diagnosed and overly used. And so that child doesn't need to be accommodated. And so really with that kind of mentality, and there's a stigma then built around a child who isn't getting the services that they really need in the classroom, but has this diagnosis. So I do think there's a growth that needs to happen in schools and churches, in better understanding that some diagnoses don't trump other diagnoses, that really a neurodivergent brain is one that needs to be honored and learned about and then respected.
Wow, that's just wonderful. It's time for us to take a short break, but when we return, we'll continue talking with Mindy Salyers. Stay with us. Today on Real Family Talk, we're talking about neurodivergent children and how we can support them and their families. We're talking with childhood development expert Mindy Salyers, who has worked with children for over 20 years.
Before the break, we talked about what neurodivergence is and what it isn't. Unquestionably, children with neurodivergence face several challenges. Mindy, what are some of those challenges?
Yeah, often we see kids with neurodiversity as really struggling with with areas that would come very naturally for us. So, for example, students who are on the autism spectrum will really struggle with social nuances, picking up on social cues, knowing how to make small talk. And yet they have such great strengths too. Neurodivergency means differently abled. So they may not be easily abled in the areas of social skills, but they have amazing strengths. Like I have sat with students on the spectrum who can do a Rubik's Cube in, a minute or less. So they have really great spatial awareness. Other things that we see in neurodivergent children is the inability to self-regulate their emotions. So often they will have outbursts and will struggle even to voice their emotion, but will have emotional reactions. I have seen those same differently abled kids get all straight A's, highly intelligent, and almost to a perfectionistic level. So I love celebrating the can-dos of neurodivergent kids. Here are all the things they can do, and then what are the areas that we need to help them do?
Isn't that amazing that in a broken world in which we live, no one is perfect, and our differences are not always a disadvantage. That there are parts of our differences that are disadvantages, but other parts are advantages, as you just pointed out with children on the spectrum. How can we, Mindy, promote self-esteem and self-advocacy skills in neurodivergent children to empower them to embrace their differences and navigate the world with confidence?
Yeah. Oh, such a great question. And the answer is in so many ways we can.
Yeah.
First and foremost, and we believe this as Christians and fellow humans, kindness, right? Kindness and grace to one another. And if we're extending that first and foremost, then that's going to give us a perspective shift where we can, really put ourselves into the figurative shoes of someone who's neurodivergent to better understand what it's like to live life with a neurodivergency. I think one of the best services parents can do is teach their children, atypical or neurodivergent, either one, that there are many different kinds of brains, and showing interaction and modeling interaction, whether it's in the grocery store, whether it be at the park, whatever it is, with kids that are neurodivergent. That's a way to set an example for your child in how to interact. This isn't someone who I treat differently. This is just someone that I connect with in a different way than I would an atypical brain. For parents who have children who are neurodivergent, I really believe so strongly in finding that diagnosis and that label to better understand your child. And you can do that in several different ways. Starting with your pediatrician is a great way. Your pediatrician can often run some assessments and some scales to understand what your child's strengths and weaknesses are. And then from that point can do some referrals. Your local school district can also do assessments and evaluations. They have two different levels. One is a kind of an early childhood intervention that goes up to age 3 typically. And that's looking for doing all the assessments of brain function, motor skills, speech and language, all of those things. And then at the preschool on up through grade 12, your local school district can do evaluations in better understanding your child's brain as well.
That's a really great point that you're making, that even if your child is in a private school, you can access your local public school system to do this testing. And of course, I know sometimes people have tried that and their local public school says they don't have all the resources to do it, but it actually is, in the United States, that is, it is the right of that family that lives in that jurisdiction, right?
Spot on. It doesn't matter if your child attends a private school, your child has the right to be evaluated. A public school will often say, well, they're not enrolled here, and so they wouldn't receive accommodations and services, which is true. So if your child, let's say, was diagnosed with a learning disability, they wouldn't be eligible to receive support services unless they enrolled at the public school. However, that evaluation process and diagnosis will help you so much advocate whether your child is at a public school or a private school, advocate to ensure that your child gets the accommodations that they deserve.
Excellent, excellent. So we just have 1 minute left in this section, and you've touched on this a little bit, but what are some ways we can create a supportive and inclusive learning environment in schools for neurodivergent children? What can the parents and the school do?
Absolutely. So once you've gone through the evaluation process, and it can either be through your local public school district or a private psychoeducational specialist, then you've got really a wealth of knowledge that you can approach your school's administration and teachers and say, hey, these are the recommended accommodations that will help my child be most successful behaviorally, emotionally, and academically at school. And so really then you can have a team of adults surround your child and advocate for the best learning modifications to help that student be successful.
Excellent. We'll talk more with Mindy Salyers when we return after a short break. Mindy will be sharing the important role the church plays in supporting neurodivergent children and their families. Stay with us.
We're back on Real Family Talk with elementary school educator and school counselor Mindy Salyers. We are talking about how to support neurodivergent children as they negotiate their environment.
You know, we've talked quite a bit about the importance of supporting neurodivergent children. One thing we haven't discussed yet is the role of the church in all of this. You know, in Matthew 25:40, Jesus said, "And the king will answer and say to them, Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." This is what Jesus says as he addresses those he calls righteous, the ones who clothe the naked, feed the poor, and so on. He says, these are the ones who will inherit the kingdom, the ones who took care of those who needed help. Clearly, he places a heavy emphasis on treating others with the utmost kindness and love. What benefit is there to provide a spiritually nurturing environment for neurodivergent children and their families?
This is bringing back memories of my daughter being diagnosed with a disability and how every step of the way as a parent, I was sharing with the trusted people in my church the journey of her diagnosis, and the testing process and all of that. And I think that's key for parents in bringing your church community alongside you to partner with, raising your child in a beautiful spiritual environment. For one, that church community can be praying for that testing process and that evaluation process, in supporting you, right? You may have other children who need childcare as you're taking them to the neurologist or taking them to be evaluated. And so giving them tangible opportunities to support you as a family will be really important for you and for them. But then it's also an educated process too, education process for the church member in the pew. So I'm just thinking about some of these diagnoses that a lot of church members are not familiar with, right? Dyscalculia is the inability to understand numbers. We talked about dyslexia, right? The inability to understand letters as an atypical brain would. Intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome, all of these different diagnoses require a lot of education around it. And so the more education as a parent that you can give your children's ministries director, your vacation Bible school leader, if you have an outdoor club similar to Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts that your church participates in, any kind of education that you can give them will be really important in bringing them alongside and creating that spiritual environment for your child.
That is so powerful, and that's so important for families to also take some responsibility to educate the church. Because as you said, a lot of people have no idea what this is, and we're just going along doing Sabbath school as we usually do. So I was thinking, when you were saying about the dyscalculia, and even dyslexia, how we often ask children to read.
Yeah.
Yes,
and
thank
what
you.
About the
So
child?
in the same way, I'm sorry. In the same way that we ask for accommodations and we advocate for our child in the school system, we want to advocate for our child in the church as well. So once we've educated the church members and those who are going to be interacting with our child about our child's strengths, their can-dos, and then their weaknesses, the things that they needed accommodations for, then I feel like any church member will have the tools then to better support them in Sabbath school, in Pathfinders or Adventures Club. So I love what you're saying, right? We pass out songbooks and just expect everyone to be able to read, but they may do better with an opportunity to learn sign language and do it up front. Last week I was with a group of pastors and teachers, and one of the pastors got up and did sign language to the music. Or they may enjoy doing any songs with hand motions, right? So there are different accommodations that we can give kids. Or I'm thinking of one that is so common, right? Please turn to Matthew 21 verse 14, and the child, can't track that or can't find the numbers or whatever it is. And so, coming alongside and quietly, and I've done this for kids, helping them find it in the Bible, very quiet ways that we can accommodate kids in really beautiful ways that help them feel like they belong in church.
That's just wonderful. And you mentioned something about capitalizing on their strengths, and then you spoke about weaknesses. We like to say growth areas, just so that we use a positive language of reinforcement. Everyone has growth areas and everyone has strengths. So, and regardless of what your ability or disability, or we like to say just different abilities, because whether it's neurodivergence or something else, we all are created with strengths and some growth areas.
I say growth areas too. I think the key really with neurodivergent kids is that they won't always be able to grow.
Yeah.
They won't ever have some skills that they're able to attain. And so understanding that we're not just holding a high expectation and you need to reach our standard, but that we need to modify so that the programming or the learning or whatever it is attainable for that child.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is so critical in church because I remember even growing up myself, being a very shy child and being like embarrassed or shamed. And, maybe I was neurodivergent, but how that felt like what other kids are outgoing and they so quickly pray or lead out in song service. And so it's really important for us to first of all, as parents, to identify to announce what our child's difficulty is, and for the Sabbath school or the church to accommodate. And so I really appreciate what you've been saying. So Mindy, real quickly before we go, are there any resources that you can share that can help families and churches with neurodivergent children?
Yes. Very recently, the Adventist Church has worked hard to embrace kids with neurodivergency. And so the Adventist Church has its own disabilities ministry. If you Google it, it's right there. There's a disability ministry for those with physical and mental and emotional disabilities. In schools, in Adventist schools, we have something called REACH, which essentially is we don't want to fail kids that have any kind of diagnoses or learning need. And so we're going to reach and grab them and support them. My favorite resource is a book by an Adventist pastor's wife. It is called Help! I'm a Parent, Parenting Kids with Different Abilities, and I highly recommend it.
Mindy, this information has been invaluable. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for watching Real Family Talk. Join us again when we'll share more about strengthening families and inspiring hope. See you next time.